Hello all. Hope you're doing well. Our friends in London, the US, Afghanistan, and India, wherever you're joining us from. I welcome you all to this seminar today. Whenever you look up on Google, if you type who is the best friend of Afghanistan, it's a silly query, but whenever you look it up, you will see the answer that uh, India has traditionally enjoyed friendly relationship with Afghanistan, and while the flight from Delhi to Kabul is like roughly about 2 hours, the countries have for years been tied very closely on a lot of mutual love and care. Um, India has traditionally been close to the Afghans, and the two countries are not only, connected with their shared past for centuries, but also go back 75 years under the Treaty of Friendship, and then subsequently with the hospitals named after former Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, a parliament which is a gift from India. Built by hundreds of Indian laborers, and then the massive student exchange program, health camps, just name it. Uh, Even after we were freed from the colonial rule, we looked to Kabul. We forged a partnership with them. Uh, in 1950, when Jawaharlal Nehru signed the Friendship Treaty with the royal government of Afghanistan, Najibullah Khan, the two countries vowed everlasting peace and friendship, everlasting. In the years to come, Bollywood, cricket, it all further strengthened the ties. And, uh, whenever I've gone to meet Afghans, wherever, they've always brought up how good they think of India. In many ways, the promise made in 1950 has continued and fulfilled, but the blot emerged in this testing era of war and conflict. Uh, when the presidential palace was stormed on 15th August by armed gunmen of Taliban, India and Afghanistan's time tested friendship entered a dark chapter, and the people who climbed the planes at the Kabul airport in their bid to escape the brutal Taliban fighters running amok Afghanistan streets, they haunted and shocked people in India as well. And in the days to come, both sides have looked at their strained relationship as a wound. Uh, there was a deafening silence in New Delhi, and as the international community looked away from the hardline terrorist group that the Taliban is, and they were parading the streets of Afghanistan, they were rendered global pariahs then. And, you know, the one question remained, is the Taliban here to stay? And if yes, what do we even do with them? And even newspapers and channels stopped calling them terrorists or the sanctioned militant group. Uh, while Russia and China were certain of the answer, India deliberated for at least 2 more years till it succumbed to the regional priorities, upsetting its old allies, including several of its friends from Ashraf Ghani administration. Uh, in India is a key regional power with significant investments in Afghanistan. And during the Republic era, we've navigated this transition with a cautious yet pragmatic approach as we then had to transition to speak with the Taliban. Um, in today's panel, we will go over the veins of India's relationship that we have for years and decades with Afghanistan, and now we are having to do that with the Taliban. Uh, we will talk about Delhi's increasingly warm relationship with the group, which is still deemed unacceptable by many in the West as of today. Uh, I'm very happy to introduce everyone to a bright and upcoming new Afghanistan think tank, Bareen Initiative for Development, uh, because of whom we are here together today. Wherever we are, Afghanistan will always tie us together, all the panelists here. Bareen represents the concept of heaven, and Saleh and his team look to create a safe and small piece of heaven on earth for marginalized communities. Uh, they are young Afghan nationals who stand for the country's girls and women. They stand for the human rights. They want to take the future forward with the prosperity and the brightness that it can be. It's an apolitical analysis driven initiative, and it's a forum for conversation with experts, diplomats, policymakers, scholars, and most importantly, Afghans. You know, Now coming back to the topic, which has caused a lot of pain and anguish to several Afghans and Indians too. Why is India even engaging with this armed group that captured power and is known for killings and bombings across Afghanistan? The transfer of power was by force and the cost of many lives, especially women. So, who wants to deal with such a group? Uh, in February 2023, when India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval went to Moscow and met with Russian officials, Afghanistan was a key point of their meeting. Uh, he made a huge promise. He said India will never abandon the people of Afghanistan. And he said that the two countries share a historical and special relationship. What we are going to talk about today, the crux of our conversation for the next few minutes, hours, is in what he said. He said the well being and humanitarian needs of the Afghan people will continue to guide India's policy towards Kabul. And in the same breath, he noted that the Afghan soil should not be used for terrorism and that the natural resources of Afghanistan should be utilized first for the welfare of Afghanistan. We will unpack this and everything in between. I want to go back a few years into the relationship India and Afghanistan have with our excellent panel here. First and foremost, we have the brilliant Mohammad Ashraf Hedri, the former Afghanistan ambassador to Sri Lanka, India, and the US. He is the founder and the president of Displaced International, an organization working to advocate and assist displaced people across the world. He was the former Director General of Policy and Strategy for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Afghanistan. He is a distinguished fellow at Arizona State University, School of Politics and Global Studies. Welcome, Ambassador. I'm always very happy to speak to you and learn from you.
Likewise, thank you so much for that generous introduction.
Yeah. Then we have the exceptional scholar and my very good friend Shivam Shekhawat from the Observer Research Foundation in New Delhi. She's a junior fellow with the ORF Strategic Studies program. She tracks India's neighbors, especially from the lens of security, political, and economic developments. And this means Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Nepal are literally her bread and butter.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Arpan, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. I'm very happy to introduce the very knowledgeable and leading international affairs expert, Dr. Arin Sharifi, who is joining us from Princeton, and I've had the pleasure to meet him in Dushanbe at 4 a.m. when we were heading for a security conference at an airport. Dr. Sharifi is a lecturer and the chair of the Master in Public Policy program at Princeton University's School of Public and International Affairs. Welcome, Dr. Sharifi, and cannot wait to hear your thoughts. I'm very excited.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here. Just a quick caveat. I just left Princeton very, very recently, and I'm on to a new project with the United Nations right now. But here I'm just representing myself, no other entity. Thank you.
All the best for what's coming next. Yes. We are very much incomplete without a PhD researcher who knows Kabul inside and out. And for that, we have Amit Kumar. He's a senior research fellow in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at the Birla Institute of Technology and Science here in India, Rajasthan. He's been researching Afghanistan, China, and regional security for 5 years now and writing about it.
Thanks, Arpan, for the introduction, and I'm looking forward to this discussion as well. Thank you.
Amazing. So let's set this ball rolling in motion, shall we? And we should hear from our amazing panel. Can we start with you, Ambassador Hedri? I'd like to hear from you on this tricky topic of, India and Afghanistan's relationship from the past. And, now you hear this topic and what do you feel?
Well, it's a very timely topic. I think it's very important for the peoples of Afghanistan and India to have this exchange. And I hope that many of them will get to either listen now or later as we discuss the historical background, as you pointed out, the people-to-people ties between our two nations beyond the governments, and even, of course, very friendly and strategic ties between various Afghan and Indian governments over decades. But let me foremost point out, I think what most Indians unfortunately don't know, and of course the Indian governments don't acknowledge as much as they should, at least over the past 2 decades. First, let's remember that the Afghan forces, and also Dr. Sharif, you could point this out as you work with the National Security Council, so I did. That the Afghan forces relentlessly fought, not just in defense of Afghanistan, but also in helping ensure regional stability and security. And India was a direct beneficiary of this. And if you recall, in the 1990s, India used to spend a lot more militarily to maintain security along the line of control. But between 2001 and 2021, it was the Afghan forces and the Afghan people that actually bled, not only for defense of our country, but also for the defense of the entire region and foremost for India, because India, as we know, has traditionally been a victim of terrorism and extremism, and we can even discuss recent cases. But fortunately, Afghans paid a heavy price for 20 long years to help ensure regional peace and stability, directly benefiting India, not only in terms of lives, but also in terms of treasure that India would have had to spend a lot more militarily to maintain security along the line of control in order to prevent terrorist attacks from across the line of control, emanating primarily from Pakistan, which provide a safe haven for the Taliban. And second, India for 20 years had full access and presence on the ground and making sure that no tangible threats emanated from Afghanistan, targeting India, either in Afghanistan or its assets in the region. Third, we signed a strategic partnership agreement, the SPA, back in October 2011, which unfortunately, despite being comprehensive, covering people-to-people security, development, economic, commercial, and people-to-people, like I said, issues. But unfortunately, it wasn't implemented fully as much as the Afghan government and the people expected it to be implemented. Because I was in Delhi, we pushed it through both parties and power in office, both Congress and BJP, but unfortunately, both were reluctant to take any tangible steps in implementing it. And yet, I think many have forgotten that Afghan people paid a heavy price, especially in the days and weeks and months and even years following the signing of that agreement, which cost the Afghan people in so many ways, and yet it wasn't unfortunately implemented at all. And it was, I think, only one meeting at the leadership level under the Council for Partnership, which is the implementing mechanism of the SPA, that took place, and that after so much effort that I, an ambassador, put into an exchange of delegations. And even though that meeting was held and some working groups were formed, after that, nothing else really materialized. And yet it came at so many, cost of so many Afghan lives. And last, in 20 years, some 2 million Afghans, and probably even more, traveled to India for tourism, for medical treatment, for education and investment. And roughly, we can easily estimate, given, of course, my own direct experience and many conversations that I had with Afghans who used to visit India on a daily basis, that each Afghan could have spent between $3,000 to $6,000. Now, times 2 million, you would see that India actually, reaped some $10 billion in revenues over a 20-year period from 2 million Afghans who visited India. And no one talks about this. Unfortunately, the 4 points that I pointed out, all you hear is how India has given us $3 billion, to which I will get. But in return, India has made multiple times more financially in terms of security, I pointed out, and as well as lives lost. So what I recall, I think I recall all those good old days that we really counted on India to build on the initial steps that it took. Mostly the aid that it provided was mostly human-centered, providing wheat when we needed it, or providing medical assistance, as you pointed out, also for hospitals, especially Indira Gandhi Hospital in Kabul, and then also providing infrastructure assistance, building the Salma Dam, the Zaranjit-Al-Aram part of the highway, the National Ring Road, and the Afghan parliament's building, and as well as a palace at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. These are some of the signature and easily memorable projects of India. Then also, I should point out, I think one of the key, programs of assistance to Afghan peoples is scholarships. The ICCR scholarships, some 1,000 plus, which gave Afghanistan the capacity it needed, and also gave India the influence it needed, because many of those students who graduated from Indian universities went back and took up jobs across the Afghan government as well as private sector, and helped advance our shared interests in democracy, human rights, and pluralism, which should have been institutionalized, but unfortunately, that didn't materialize. So I would stop there and then take more questions.
Okay. I'll just move to the next speaker for, hearing more on just like the main theme of this. I want to come to Shivam now. I want to ask Shivam, how she feels about the topic where like India and the Taliban share some sort of diplomacy today, but, going back to the relationship they've had, when you said you saw the topic, what were the first thoughts that came to your mind? I mean, being in Delhi, I understand the anger that we get from our friends, our neighbors. So, I want to hear more from you on that.
I think thank you so much for your question. I would like to build up on something that Ambassador Headri mentioned, that, the kind of like the relationship between Afghanistan and India has, we all know that it has been premised on the people to people ties, the long-standing cultural affinities between the two people, and the historical relationship. But as Ambassador Headri also mentioned, that while we do understand that, the Afghans greatly benefited from what India offered in the last 20 years, it was a two-way process. That is, India also did enjoy a lot of benefits from cultivating that goodwill with the Afghan people. So I think when I think about how India has been, like the kind of relationship that India has with Afghanistan since 2021, I think when we go back to August 2021 and track how the actions that India took in the first few weeks, you would see that a lot of even the Indian officials at that time considered India's approach ad hoc at the moment. That is, a lot of the actions that India had taken were taken like in a very reactionary manner, in terms of shutting down the embassies, closing the consulates, as well as the topic which has been a major point of contestation between the Afghan people and their major grievance against India. That is, India revoked a lot of pre-existing visas. It also dismantled any other visa procedures that it was offering to the Afghan people, and it just came up with the emergency visa. So I think when we want to understand India's relationship with the Taliban regime in the past 4 years, I do see it as being that of it does seem a lot like a dichotomy, in the sense that while as opposed to a lot of other countries in the region, for example, be it China, be it Russia, be it Iran, who have had to engage with Afghanistan, and they have done so fairly well, like in the last 4 years, a major consideration which kind of prevented India initially from having a cohesive approach towards Afghanistan was the fact that it faced a dilemma which not a lot of other countries faced. That is, even though it was cognizant of its own security concerns, it was cognizant of the fact that there is now a regime in power in Afghanistan, and there is much less clarity about the implications that it could have for the region. It also had to be mindful of the fact that it does share a lot of goodwill with the Afghan people that a lot of other countries do not share, and so the expectation that the people of Afghanistan have with India might not have similar expectations with other countries. So I think because of this added expectation that was posed on India's initial policy response, and even now the engagement with Afghanistan is seen critically by a lot of Afghan people. And I feel it would, as a scholar who has been covering this region for a while, we have seen major progress in the relationship in this year, especially starting January 2025, when the foreign secretary met the acting foreign minister of Afghanistan. So while there has been an increase in the momentum of the relationship, and especially after Operation Sindoor, when the India's external affairs minister also talked to the acting foreign minister of Afghanistan, I think there is also some progress on the front of India resuming some of the support that it wants to give to the Afghan peoples. Like in terms of, while a lot of the kind of visas that were given before the Taliban came into power, while it has not reopened or it has not expanded in the same scale and degree, there has been some progress on that front. Like in April 2023, in the Indian website, India's visa portal did show that they have opened different kind of visas for Afghan people, and those visas range for students, their dependents, medical visas, for businessmen, and for sports and other programs. So while that still does not make up for a lot of other things that India could have done, I feel that it took a while for India to kind of reach that point, but now there is some attempt to take both things in tandem. That is because of the security constraints, because of the risk to its national interest that it faces with Afghanistan, with Taliban being in power in Afghanistan, and the terror risk that it poses. It has also now started formulating some sort of an approach towards the Afghan people as well, kind of like co-opting them again in its foreign policy towards Afghanistan. So while there is still some progress to be made on that front, I think like the fact that it's happening slightly simultaneously does feel like that India's policy is kind of becoming relatively much more cohesive than it was back in 2021. So it's still a long way to go, but I think the balancing between its security considerations and the interests of the Afghan people has improved in the last 3-4 years. So I'll just keep it to this for now and take it up.
I do know for a fact that a lot of our friends in Afghanistan don't agree with the fact that India has done a good balancing act, and their anger is very justified. I feel like they've always looked at India as a friend, and they really had hopes, maybe not from any other neighbor, but definitely India, you know. And because, this is an important note that I should make here on this call. None of us represent Afghan women here. We are very poor on that representation right now, which is a bigger fallout of India speaking with the Taliban. In the process, like any other country, we've left Afghan women behind. And even on this panel, we've not been able to get any. That is something that will be improved in the future. The bigger consequence of dealing with someone like the Taliban, which is a hardline regime and does not care for Afghan women, is that nearly half of their population goes unheard. And uh, it is anything but natural for Afghans to expect that we would, as Indians, we would talk about it, because in our country, we have a female president. We definitely do stand for a lot more gender equality. There isn't any gender apartheid even in our history. So, uh, while we've had our own share of problems, we've not spoken to the Taliban about these things, and this is a huge heartburn. So my apologies on that part. We don't have any Afghan, female representation here. But, okay, I'll move to Dr. Sharifi now, because I'm very excited to speak to him on a few aspects here. Dr. Sharifi, I don't think I've asked you this before. How do you remember India? despite multiple conversations we've had, how do you remember India? And did you expect India to do much better, in terms of diplomatic relationship with its neighbor?
Well, the last time I was in Delhi was in March of 2020, right before COVID hit. I think I was on one of the last flights that actually did take place from Delhi to Kabul, and then within a week or so, then all flights were grounded because of COVID. But I've visited India a lot of times, many, many times, and got a lot of friends there. And honestly speaking, and I've said this to a lot of my Indian friends, that India is um, one of three countries that I can feel when I am there, I feel like I am home. I don't feel like I'm in a foreign country. Of course, Afghanistan is the first home, and where I was born, I grew up, and America is a second home. I've been here past 2.5 decades, lived here, based here. But also India, I have that feeling, that sense of closeness. And I think it goes back to the theme that you were talking, and Ambassador Haidari and Shivam all talked, relations between India and Afghanistan. It goes back centuries. It's not only a state-to-state relations, mostly people to people. And that's the feeling that I personally get. But let me echo what both Ambassador Haidari and Shivam said in terms of the relationship that existed, the two-way relationship that existed during the Afghan Republic between Kabul and Delhi. Now, Ambassador Haidari really did an excellent overview of all the different, aspects of the relationship. I was more exposed on the security aspect, and from my several years at the National Security Council, we had very, very close cooperation with India when it came to issues of security, particularly when it came to counterterrorism. There was very, very close cooperation and a lot of intelligence sharing. I cannot, and I do not really wish to go into the details of any of it, although I do have quite a lot of interesting stories to tell. But there was much that was shared between the two countries, and of course, given the nature of the situation and the threats that were posed to India, it was mostly us basically sharing information, sharing intelligence, and not only that, but also cooperating, all the way from the strategic to the operational, even to the tactical level. We did that cooperation. And so just echoing that the relationship was two ways, that the benefits were actually two ways, and the feelings I hope that I had is actually two. In my experience, it is two ways. The other point I wanted to mention with regard to the India-Taliban relationship, that the actual contacts, now, I'm not saying that the initial contacts, but the initial widespread contact between India and the Taliban actually started at least a couple of years before the fall of Kabul. Without getting into any specifics of it, the Indian government, like any other government, like any other responsible government that is looking for its own security, that is looking for its own national interest, I think we're predicting something catastrophic to happen in Afghanistan. And as such, and even though they, did not really like to engage with the Taliban, but their engagement did actually start a couple of years before the fall. And then, of course, that reluctance, given the Taliban-Pakistan relationship and that closely knit relationship for decades, that reluctance translated into, a longer time for India to really get now into not only at the intelligence level, security contacts, but also at the diplomatic level relationship. And it's the way almost all other countries are conducting. So, in fact, I'm not really, as an Afghan, I'm not criticizing India for being pragmatically in touch with the current authorities in Afghanistan, with the Taliban. It's basically looking into its own interests in the same way that Pakistanis do, the Iranians do, Central Asians do, the Russians recognize them, the Chinese do, even Americans are in touch with them. But nevertheless, we should not also forget that, a longer, a more fruitful, a sort of a mutually responsible relationship will only happen and will only be possible between Afghanistan and India when there is, a legitimate, law-based, a broad-based government in Kabul that could have those legitimate and that could have those sort of methodical ties to Delhi.
Yeah, I guess we all kind of believe, and I hope we all agree on the fact that while the Taliban is regarded as the de facto authority, they did not come based on any election. They do not have any constitution. They also do not have any formal and viable legal justice system in the country. These are sort of the pillars that give any sort of validity to a country. And for as long as they deny the rights and the basic human rights, I mean the very basic to their women, uh, I don't think they can ever be recognized as the legitimate power holders of the country. uh, you know Amit, do you want to say something? Do you have thoughts here? Because we've gone through a lot of topics, as we went from the start. So I was wondering if you've been thinking about something and you want to share your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity once again. And I would like to continue with the same thing that Mr. Ashraf and Sharifi and Shivam have been talking about. I think India's stand has been quite pragmatic in the sense that India never intended to participate in the global war of terrorism. India was a supporter of it, but India never participated in the sense of contributing any militarily or anything. We have had a very long history with Afghan, and of course, for that matter, I have studied with a lot of Afghani people in Delhi University, and I've spent time with them. So I definitely understand their concern that why did India not come up? But I think beyond this affective turn of politics where emotions are involved, I think it is always the national interest that is supreme. And from my standpoint, I believe that Indian government did what is it really in the interest of the Indian government, Indian people. So when the Kabul was falling, I think India was in touch with the Taliban, and not just India, a lot of other governments like the Chinese, the Russians, they were also in touch with the Taliban government. And why should we not? When the US itself started engaging with the Taliban through backdoor channels way back in 2007 and 8, when they picked up the current deputy prime minister. And put them behind the bars in 2011. So even the US were not intentionally there to stay forever. They made it clear by using backdoor channels to interact with the Taliban. And Taliban always fought by saying that this is a foreign occupation. We do not recognize the government that has come with the existence of US support, and uh, they have projected themselves to bear the flag of the Pashtun nationalism, and they are fighting for the right of self determination. By any chance, I'm not justifying that the Taliban government is legitimate or Taliban government is illegitimate. All that I'm saying is that the political situation within Afghanistan was so confusing that India preferred to stay out of this domestic chaos. And as India has always maintained that it is never going to interfere in the domestic affair of any country, India maintained it till even the Kabul fell. Had there been any militaristic exchange between the Afghan Republican government and India, then there would have been a question: why did India not chipped itself in when the Kabul was falling? But wait, India never helped in any kind of operation within Afghanistan. So there, it was not right for India to intervene at the last moment in any sort of uh, arrangement with the Republican government. True that our trade has been good, our people to people bonding has been absolutely fantastic. I mean, the words like good or bad are relative. So if you ask an Afghani, which I think I have had a lot of interaction and I have studied with them, I think if you ask an Afghani, hey, which country would you prefer? I think they will opt for India without doubt. A lot of Afghanis find like Mr. Sharifi has said that India is a very comforting nation. And today, if you see, like even before, the Afghans could have probably gone to Pakistan and China these days, but I believe given a chance, they would always prefer to come to India because India has made them feel like home, and we ourselves believe that we have been very uh, good friends or great friends with Afghan. So, barring the emotion, barring what people really need, I think we stand as a nation, and the government's job is to look at us from the national perspective, and that is where the real problem is. And I would not go into the
Can I respond to this?
yes, yes, sir, please, please.
I think I would really disagree with you on how like the Afghan people still would embrace, of course, the people of India, but certainly not the government of India. Look,
Yes,
the
yes, right.
Indian government had a number of choices.
Yes.
It was not confused. I disagree with that. And
Okay.
the Indian government could have chosen to keep the embassy open, at least symbolically, right? It could have. Second,
Okay.
the Indian government didn't have to cancel all the visas. Remember, we had the student visas, we had the patients, we had families, we had tourists, all stranded in India. Why? Punishing the Afghan people, the same people, like I said,
Yeah.
bled for the people of India, for the government of India, for 20 long years and benefited India financially. We can calculate between $6 to $10 billion easily. 2 million Afghans visited. No Indian really, cares to mention
So,
this, but we need to remind. And also, India could have continued your advocacy role for speaking for the people of Afghanistan. If you forget about the men of Afghanistan, but not about the women of Afghanistan, 50% of our population is women. And India is, the largest democracy in the world. It always really, stands out when it comes to these democratic ideals, pluralism, values. And there's nothing wrong, I think, for India to pursue not only a core national security agenda, besides, a values-based foreign policy, because there, in our context, is intertwined. And remember that India is not US. US are, all over the place on the one hand. On the other hand, a country in the Western Hemisphere, too far from Afghanistan. Yet India is the immediate neighbor of Afghanistan. So what happens under a non-state actor? Remember, the Taliban are not a government. They're not a state. They're not legitimate international in the United Nations Charter. They're the same terrorist actor which blew up the Indian mission in Kabul and killed Indian diplomats and, of course, military officers, and the same terrorist group which facilitated multiple terrorist attacks on Indian assets, consulates across Afghanistan, right? And so they're the same Taliban who were brainwashed, indoctrinated in the same madrasas which only recently hit India. So we shouldn't distinguish between good Taliban and bad Taliban, Taliban that now somehow befriend India, even pragmatically speaking. So while maintaining that pragmatic approach, and there's nothing wrong with it, India's regional power, it has to have, a presence in Afghanistan to be on the, lookout for terrorists and for other, issues of concern and interest. But India should have never abandoned the people of Afghanistan, much like it should have never abandoned the people of Bangladesh or should have not abandoned the people of Nepal, right? We saw it at least in case of Bangladesh, how abandoning the people of Bangladesh, but throwing this entire support behind a government that cost India in ways that we know. As a result, I think India made a serious mistake in abandoning the people of Afghanistan. I can tell you easily that just before 2021, on any given day, you would see multiple social media posts about issues just we discussed, the people-to-people ties from Bollywood movies to Indian songs to you don't see that anymore. You can go on social media and you don't see Afghans posting anything about India anymore. That's one way to measure how the people of Afghanistan have been abandoned and how they feel and what they feel about it. And India can easily restore, I think, what it has lost over the past 4 years. On the one hand, of course, maintaining its engagement in a way that doesn't by any means recognize or legitimize the Taliban, but on the other hand, really restore its relationship with the Afghan people, foremost starting with the visas. Let Afghans visit India for education, for medical treatment, for other purposes, right? Because they're all screened for security. If their background is clear, why not give them a visa? And secondly, be a voice for the Afghan people, for the Afghan woman, right? Be an advocate under the UN Charter and all these multilateral platforms where India has heavy presence, from Shanghai, Cooperation Organization to BRICS to, of course, REC, Russia, India, China, and to Quad even. Even among democracies, India could stand out to say that we as the largest democracy shouldn't abandon our values, democratic values, especially about a people who bled for all of us for 20 long years, believing in the promise of democracy. And we should continue, speaking up for them, because doing so would help us, as Dr. Sharifi said, on the long run. And even on the short to medium term, because it's really hard for all of us, and I don't know how India is calculating its trust that it has unfortunately placed in the Taliban. The same Taliban, like I said, has hurt and harmed India and will do so again, because state actors are state actors. They're up for rent by any other player that gives them whatever resources that they want on that day or that week to hit at that target of that bigger powers, interest. And so coming back, I think India can maintain that relationship with the Afghan people through continued humanitarian assistance, advocacy for women, advocacy for institutionalization of democracy and human rights, and also be, again, an advocate in these multilateral forums. And also, I think, me speaking as the president and founder of Displaced International, be a safe haven for the Afghan talent. Really
Okay.
convene these conferences and forums for the Afghan diaspora. Now, much of Afghanistan's brain is now outside. India has an opportunity to bring this brain close to the neighborhood in Delhi and other cities in India, where we, as Dr. Sharifi pointed out, have visited multiple times to get together, talk, meet, connect with the Indians, hold, say, culturally speaking, these music festivals, film festivals, which India used to host. India can do all of these things on the one hand with the diaspora, with the people on the ground through humanitarian aid, with Afghan women, we know that's easy. And also with the Taliban, keep a connection and a link with the Taliban to see what the Taliban are up to. Sorry, I went
But
off that.
I believe
Yeah,
that,
yeah, no worries.
as I do want to point out a small contradiction. However, I agree with 95% of what you said, Ambassador. Having to involve the Afghans that are currently residing in India, it poses a security threat for them, because they could be probably wanted by the Taliban, and they are currently in a state where they don't want to be public, you see. So yes, while engaging them culturally is how other countries are going about it. Be it any sort of security conference involving Afghans, we try to represent the culture of the country. In India, I feel having spoken to many Afghans who've come here and taken refuge, they are too afraid. So I guess I understand what you are saying, but there are possible
Well, I
caveats
think
to
the
it.
security threat doesn't come from the Afghan people. I served there. I never sensed or saw or etc. Even having worked with the security
No,
personnel of the Indian government.
the
So the
the
security problem comes from the LLC. We know where that comes from. So I think, and also on the Indian people, the Indian government leadership as a responsibility to educate the Indian people if there are concerns, and also do away with this Muslim and Hindu thing. That is also unfortunately harming the relationship. That we, Afghans, yeah, we happen to be Muslim, and you have even a much larger Muslim population than
Did I
the
mention that they are
us.
wanted by,
So we
the
don't want to
Taliban?
go. We don't want to go there. But on that, I think all said. What I'm saying is that the Indian people are okay. Where problems come is for Indian government. They have to do more on all those issues that I just pointed out, and they can do it. They're in a position to do so.
Okay.
With all due respect, shall I respond to
No, no, no. This
Ambassador?
is still the
It's
first
it's
half of
it,
it. Please hold
yes.
your points. I'll come back to you. I promise I'll come back to you, Amit, and I'll give you enough space to, address this. But I need to go to Shivam for, the structure that I've decided for this panel. I mean, Ambassador, you've mentioned that, Delhi should have done way much more. But I want to understand the initial resistance that Delhi showed when the Taliban came to power in August 2021, and how did Delhi try to navigate its relationship with Kabul? And there were like a couple of years in there between where Delhi did not, we still don't raise the flag of Islamic Emirate despite, the Republicans having evacuated. So, Shivam, can you take the part where you explain how Delhi did fight back initially, and probably answer some of Ambassador Headri's, queries? Yeah.
Um, I think if you go back to July, August 2021, I remember in July 2021, it was India's presidency at the UNSC when the Taliban were slowly registering wins in Afghanistan, and they were slowly capturing the country. And I think as the president back then, I think India did feel a lot of pressure that way to kind of take initiative in terms of, coming out with some resolution in Afghanistan. And at that time, if you go back to the resolutions as well, the focus, there was a lot of emphasis, there was still some emphasis on Afghan owned and Afghan led process. And while India as part of, as the president did make a call for ensuring that this territory of Afghanistan should not be used as a base to kind of attack other countries in the region. It also called for inclusive political development in the country, and that whatever transition happens, should be all inclusive. So I think when we start seeing how India reacted to the whole thing, I think we should put that as the first response. And I think subsequently, while in the initial days, the Indian leadership was also saying that they are kind of waiting for the situation to stabilize a bit in terms of, some semblance of security to come in, and then they will see how they want to react to that. But I think so on India's part, while it was resisting, and in terms of in completely accepting the fact that the Taliban are here to stay or they have come back to power, I think the situation developed on the ground fairly quickly. So if there was the attack which happened at the airport in Afghanistan, which killed a lot of people, and the responsibility was taken by the ISKP. I think that raised a lot of, that reiterated and reignited a lot of the fears that people in India had about, the security implications of the Taliban coming back to power. And I think these factors then subsequently brought some sort of pragmatism in how India wanted to deal with it. But even back then, India still insisted on asking the de facto authorities in Afghanistan to formulate an inclusive government, and to focus on, and to respect the rights of women and minorities. So that was like the initial few weeks. Then there was a public meeting. There was a meeting between India's then ambassador to Qatar and the head of the Taliban's political office in Doha, which did create a perception that this, and kind of became an image of India's growing pragmatism, that while New Delhi is not very comfortable with the idea of the Taliban coming back to power in Afghanistan, and while they did kind of were slightly taken aback with how quickly it happened, and while it would pose a lot of security risk for India in terms of there being an absence of the US security umbrella which was there for a long time, it was kind of slowly taking stock of the situation. And I think I see that as the starting point of India's pragmatism. Since then, as we have seen, when the attack at the airport happened, after that there was a Chinese hotel, a hotel in Afghanistan with a lot of Chinese tourists, which was targeted, or the attack on the Russian embassy. I think all those attacks which happened, it made that security threat much more potent than it was eventually thought to be. So I think that infused a lot of pragmatism in the relationship. But I do feel. Even in those first 6 months, there was India was still very ambiguous in terms of how it wanted to portray its engagement. So it was still not very not accept like not publicly accepting that this is here to stay. There was like slow gradual engagement with the Taliban, but it was still not something that was seen as the inevitable, that this has to be done. I think then as situation slowly developed, considering the region that India is, considering there were other countries in the region like China and Russia who had started engaging with the Taliban, who had started, especially China, I think, and the bilateral relationship between India and China was also not at the best position at that time. I think all those factors also created a perception that if India does not act, there could be a situation where it would be left behind as opposed to the other countries in the region. And hence, India did slowly started recalibrating its position. So I think while it did stop the developmental aid that it was offering to the Afghan people, it continued with its humanitarian aid. It did give a lot of food and medical supplies that it has all historically been giving. It did start giving that as well. And I think after August, September 2021, the major development in the relationship in India's policy towards Afghanistan, the Taliban regime, was when India's then Joint Secretary of the PI division visited Afghanistan, and after that there was the opening of India's technical mission, which was which was the stated objective of it was to coordinate the humanitarian aid in Afghanistan. So I feel like the terror threat did kind of propel India to quickly take stock of how it wants to act towards the country. But I think it was slowly trying to also come at some consensus in terms of the humanitarian aspect of it. But I think what happened, and if we compare it to what the relationship has been going through right now, I think there is a much more better understanding of the terror, the risk, the security risk that is posed by Afghanistan. So we also have to understand that the Islamic Emirate, which claims to be the sole authority in Afghanistan at the moment, they say that they have established a governance system. They say that a lot of the revenue, they've brought the economy back on track, that the economy is self-funded, and they make a lot of claims about their legitimacy. But we do have to understand that the situation within the country is not that stable. So we have to understand that while the Taliban on the face of it publicly might deny that there are no other terror groups inside the country, and that Afghanistan does not pose a risk to other countries, we do know that a lot of terrorist organizations like the ISKP, like the Al-Qaeda, are fast proliferating, have proliferated their networks within the country. So that does pose a lot of risk. And there is the fact that the Taliban publicly deny the presence of these groups inside the country also puts into question the kind of confidence that India can pose into the Taliban's capability in actually combating them. So I think that is still a dilemma that India faces, that, even if it understands the importance of engaging in some form of shape with the Taliban in order to secure its own strategic interest, is that enough to ensure that India's interests would be protected? Because, the Taliban have their own considerations for reaching out to India. They have their own legitimacy constraints. Like, if we, something that I find very peculiar as like a scholar is when you see that the way that they project their own image to the outside world. So a lot of their statements, a lot of their public announcements emphasize on the fact that, their engagement with other countries is very pragmatic, and they do not, it's not that if two countries have adversarial relations, it means that they will also kind of follow that, and they frame it in a very pragmatic approach, while internally we do know that this is not how they function. So I think a lot of the contradictions within the Taliban regime itself makes India's position kind of precarious. But yeah.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Shivam. Thank you so much for the detail, but like a thorough summary of how we're dealing with the Taliban. It's a tricky relationship, but we are navigating it with a very careful balance. I mean, India has bled most in the region when it comes to the terrorist attacks, especially when we've not been the one to harbor any of the groups. So, we've bled, we've lost a lot of innocent lives. So India has to kind of look out for itself. These are some of its concerns. But, what we are actually, not able to take into account is that India is surrounded by Pakistan and China, its rivals, and also sort of, kind of players that he needs to keep an eye on. And I remember Dr. Sharifi and I were talking about it day before yesterday. You know, the role this kind of engagement with the Taliban, how it impacts, the implication it has for the relationship Pakistan and China also have. The influence of India, Pakistan, and India, China's rivalries on shaping New Delhi's influence, on Afghanistan policy. Dr. Sharifi, do you want to walk us through what happens when India is facing Pakistan and China, and it has to also, be in contact with the Taliban? How does Delhi decide what to do?
So I think you put it exactly how things are, Arpan. You have Pakistan that has had historical relationships with the Taliban, but that relationship has deteriorated very, very badly over the past couple of years, at least, mainly due to the presence of TTP in Afghanistan and also the BLA, also the Baluch Liberation Army is said to have some sort of presence and backing in Afghanistan. And then you have China, which also, again, has had ties with the Taliban for a long time. And then since the Taliban takeover about 4 years ago, the Chinese has had an increasingly active presence in Afghanistan, mostly in the economic sector, but also they're not forgetting their strategic values. And so India, what can India do? Again, not to ignore all the very, very valid points that Ambassador Haidari mentioned. And I think he actually proposed a very tangible, really pragmatic policy for India. Well, to not to forget the strategic value of pragmatic engagement, but at the same time, there are a lot that the Indian government can do. I fully back him on that one. Coming specifically to the strategic issue, I think from a very pragmatic point of view, India has to engage with the Taliban for its own security benefits, for its own national interests and strategic interests in the region. And rumor, of course, has it that the Indian government is very much involved. I mean, I don't have anything to back that up in my research that I continuously do in the region, specifically when it comes to issues of terrorism and organized crime. Of course, I have no evidence to back this up, but rumor is that India is still supporting the TTP, that India is still supporting the Baluch Liberation Army against Pakistan. As you can see, over the past at least 2 years, these two groups have really, really created massive problems for the Pakistani government. It's actually gotten to a point now that the Pakistani government really claims that their control in two of their four provinces, the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, where it's mainly the base of operation for the TTP and its splinter groups, and also then the Balochistan province, which is mainly base of operation for the BLA and the Majid Brigade, which is attached to the BLA. That the Pakistani government is almost losing its grip over control in these two provinces. So the Pakistanis are really facing massive, massive, massive problems. I recall in 2024, last year, in fact, I did a rough calculations based on all the data that existed in open sources. Roughly, there was on average of over 3 attacks per day by the TTP in Pakistan. That's pretty big. That's pretty big. And so India seems to be active at the strategic level in the region. And again, I don't think there's much that India does with regard to what China is doing in Afghanistan, because China is primarily interested in the economic sector and the minerals, and the mineral deposits there. But Pakistan, of course, always sees Afghanistan as its strategic depth. And so that is where India has been trying to balance Pakistan. And that's where India has been trying to hit back. Now, again, from my perspective, this may be a pragmatic, short-term sort of solution in which India could gain something. But again, if we learn anything from the long experience of Pakistan in trying to sort of distinguish between good and bad terrorists and trying to, use good terrorists for their own benefit, I don't think this would be a good solution for India's problems with regard to the threat of terrorism. I don't think that would also be a good way to go for establishing and, in fact, maintaining those long historical ties with Afghanistan. But again, given what is going on in Afghanistan, I don't think any country, either in the region or in the broader areas, I don't think any of the countries right now think of anything long term when it comes to Afghanistan. I think everybody is cognizant that the present moment in Afghanistan is just a moment, and nobody knows how long this moment will continue, how long this moment will be. But everybody knows that this cannot and will not be, the permanent settlement in Afghanistan. The change will come, some kind of a change, hopefully good change and peaceful change. And so everybody is trying to basically deal with the short-term, day-to-day business. And I think that's exactly what the Indian government is doing.
Also, I may just add, if you don't mind, to build on this, that look, India doesn't have to pursue a zero-sum game in Afghanistan. If there's one lesson that India should learn from Pakistan for years, is that's exactly that. Pakistan has been pursuing that, lose-win, zero-sum strategic or strategy in case of Afghanistan, and look what has happened to Pakistan. In case of India, India as a regional power, at least if not a global power, has an opportunity not only to lead on humanitarian and advocacy, but also strategically, and to strategically engage with Pakistan, with Iran, with, of course, China under the umbrella of ACO, whose core, agenda objectives are to address the problem or the threat of terrorism, extremism, criminality, and separatism. And here they just all of the countries that I mentioned recently met in China. And recently, India and China have been been meeting, and in, of course, reaction to the tariffs imposed on in India, etc. But that aside, again, coming back to the region, the expectation for India to lead on a win-win basis to its own advantage is, I think, really one that India should consider away from these zero sums, which Dr. Sharifi just pointed out, which comes foremost at the cost of the Afghan people, because TTP is sheltered in Afghanistan. And ultimately, India using TTP to head Pakistan is costing the Afghan people. And that's what I'm worried about. That's what I care about the most. Unfortunately, that India has been more transactional than, and of course, confrontational with its competitors than cooperative, pursuing a win-win strategy where it helps itself, it helps the Afghan people, but also helps ensure and maintain regional stability, which India needs for, its grand vision of connecting with Central Asia. And without that stability in Afghanistan, supported by the Afghan people, demanded by the Afghan people, there is no way for India to achieve its more long-term geo-economic objectives.
I mean, I totally get why you say that, Ambassador. But I have a very interesting trivia for you, sort of a question I wanted to ask you. When there was the Pahalgam terrorist attack in Kashmir, in April, which I think we've lost Amit here. Can we have him back on? Sorry. Just 1 second. Okay, I think we've lost him for a bit here. I just hope he joins back real quick because this actually concerns him. Yeah, he's back on. Thank God you're back because, I was actually coming to you. You were shifting in your chair, and I know you want to answer to, everything that has been said so far. But I have a very interesting trivia for Ambassador. When the Pahalgam terrorist attack took place, which of the regional players actually came forward and offered condemnation?
Say again, I didn't hear that, the last part of your question.
When the Pahalgam terrorist attack took place and we lost 26 civilians, and news reports definitely show that the terrorist attack used weapons that came down from the regional states. Which regional player actually came forward to condemn the attack
Well, everyone,
wholeheartedly?
more or less, I
I
think
think I
everyone.
think the answer is actually with Amit. Amit, do you want to take this one? You're on mute right now. Yeah, now you.
Yeah, thank you. I think there was some technical glitch and I lost the connection, so I'm back. Yeah, so I think I would say that India's approach to Taliban and the security is of course not so comparable with the Chinese, because Chinese are like way more engaged with the Taliban in Afghanistan, and India is looking at
Just
Taliban
1 second. Sorry.
on key.
Who condemned the attack on Pahalgam? I was just asking the ambassador, and I
Yeah,
think you
yeah.
know the answer.
Yeah, I think Taliban were there who condemned the Pahalgam attack, and so, but I think this indeed is I personally see as a diplomatic win for India if the Taliban themselves come forward and condemn the attack, and this is precisely because Taliban were the people who were involved in the early 2000 or the late 90s when the hijacking of Air India happened. So I see that India is on a case to case basis relationship with the Taliban. We give you something, but in return we want something from you which should be solid and substantive. And I don't really know if this confidence or this relationship is really going to translate something into multilateral organization like SCO and any other multilateral organization, because I think the Chinese have better dominance there. The recent attack that happened in the Pahalgam was maybe in a bilateral relationship condemned by the countries. However, it did not find any mention of Pahalgam terror attack um, in the SCO statement, which I think Ambassador Ashraf would be aware of this. So I don't really know if the Taliban tomorrow gets the observer status back in the SCO would condemn the terror attack or not. But definitely Taliban emerged out of nowhere and condemned the Pahalgam attack. This to me is a diplomatic win for India to make Taliban speak of how the Pahalgam attack is something that is not acceptable. So, yeah,
Well, I think the Taliban are too desperate. They would do anything. Remember that non-state actors are very pragmatic. They're more pragmatic than the state actors because really they have no leverage. And whatever attention that they get and whoever gives them that attention, or, in this case, India, if we believe what you are saying, then the Taliban would say exactly that. Why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they? The Taliban are not recognized. They're not legitimate by any means. They're a sanctioned terrorist group. And as you said, even India has not recognized them. And recently, their so-called foreign minister was barred from visiting India, in which probably India indirectly played a role while inviting, but not really receiving him, because the sanctions committee did not clear his visit. So again, like I said, India can choose a win-win strategy over what perhaps Pakistan has done, and it has cost Pakistan. We're already seeing that, even though Pakistan now, we're hearing how their relationship has worsen with the Taliban. I don't believe so. It's if it had, then Pakistanis would have really, criticized the, Taliban leadership and the rest of the Taliban would not make any distinction between good Taliban, bad Taliban, TTP, or the Taliban in Afghanistan, which now India is doing the same. So India has unfortunately departed from stated principled position of making no distinction between good terrorists and bad terrorists. But in case of the Taliban over the past 4 years, India has exactly done so. making a distinction between terrorists that hit India, but the terrorists that just keep shut and here and there collaborate with India and giving India the kind of presence that it might pragmatically at this point need, and competing with China and Pakistan, which will get nowhere because it's a zero sum, unfortunately. We have seen too many of these zero sum games, unfortunately, victimizing Afghanistan for the last 5 decades. And I'm here really to defend the Afghan people. I don't care about the interests of the region as much as we've tried to bring to their attention that their interests are intertwined with those of Afghans and vice versa. And that involves the importance of institutionalizing values. And those values are democracy, pluralism, in human rights, and women's rights. If you're not going to do it, this, problem will come back to haunt you in much ways, in much similar ways that it has Pakistan.
Okay, but then, Ambassador, why does the same onus not fall on China or Russia? Because they are actually prancing fourth when it comes to engaging with the Taliban. And in fact, the normalization starts there. And other countries are just supposed to follow suit. I mean, I'd really love to hear from all of you here on this. Can we really afford to isolate Afghanistan because it's held with the by the Taliban, and in fact then abandon Afghan population, because that's what it's going to lead to then, right?
Well, because China is authoritarian and so is Russia, and they are not India. And India is a democracy, and also the fact that Afghans have suffered more as a result of hostile relationship between India and Pakistan. And the fact that India had such a presence and access in Afghanistan that cost the Afghan people endlessly. Like I said, the signing of the strategic partnership agreement, out of which we got nothing but death, unfortunately, in return for which India made no strategic investment, and it abandoned Afghanistan as quickly as it could, much in similar ways as China did and Russia did and the rest of the world did.
Right. Shivam, I think there's also the part where I wanted to get the terrorism addressed by you. You know, the fact that we've had 26/11 Mumbai terror attacks. We've had the Pahalgam recent one. In the past decade, we've been plagued by terrorist attacks, right? I actually want to understand from you, how does that influence New Delhi's ties at a point where it is either faced with a choice of being friends with the Taliban or making an enemy out of that region? Can we actually look to be enemies with whoever is in that region where a lot of terrorism groups have been harbored?
Uh, as you mentioned, like in one of your previous statements, you asked Ambassador Hedri as well that, can we really afford to isolate the Taliban, and and then inadvertently also, which would mean that isolate Afghanistan. So I think if I respond from that perspective, definitely that is something that we can't do. And when the Taliban did come to when they came to power in August 2021, this was tried, in the sense that the international community felt that if we isolate them to a point, and if we put a lot of pressure on them, they would maybe balk on some of the decisions that they're taking, and because they need international legitimacy, or because they need funding to come inside the country, they would step back on some of their regressive and draconian policies. But obviously, as we can see, 4 years later, that has not happened, and they have become even worse. So obviously, isolation did not work. But separately, if I talk about the terror landscape, something that I also referred to in my previous inputs, for India, definitely the terror threat emanating from the region is very important. And it has always, its engagement over the years has always kind of ensured that, its security interests are protected in Afghanistan. And I think for now, since 2021, owing to the development in the relationship between Pakistan and Afghanistan. So the kind of expectation that Pakistan had in terms of what a post Republic Afghanistan would mean for them, that has not materialized. So I think that situation has given India relatively more space to ensure that its concerns are adequately addressed. So a lot of terror groups which are inimical towards India, that is Lashkar-e-Taiba, either it's Jaish-e-Mohammed, there have been a lot of reports stating that they've all gotten support from the Taliban at some point, and they were also like they are currently also they run training centers. Their networks have expanded. Even some of these bigger groups, so like ISKP, while there have been fewer instances of the group clearly marking India as like one of the countries that it deems to target, the attacks in Iran or the attacks on Russia, which happened recently, and the ISKP's growing capability to kind of focus more on transnational attacks is obviously a cause of concern. So while there has been some degree of propaganda targeted against India from the ISKP, especially in terms of something that was happening, any domestic issues that were happening within India, and that was taken up to kind of as a propaganda point by the ISKP to further its own recruitment, or maybe so that is definitely that is a concern. Even if we talk about Al Qaeda, so when the strikes recently happened in May 2025, when India and Pakistan were engaged in a conflict, and when India struck a lot of camps in Pakistan, there was a statement from the Al Qaeda in the subcontinent stating how they see it, how they don't agree with what has happened, and they would now also pursue jihad against India. So I'm saying that a lot of these threats, they have not kind of materialized in a very, like, there's not been a very direct targeting of India, but obviously India has to take stock of all that is happening. Al Qaeda has also spread its network within the country. It has spread in a lot of in the northern provinces where it wasn't present before. It has expanded its training facilities. It has expanded its weapons inventory. So I think from that perspective, the security threat that it poses, India can't afford to not look at Afghanistan. It has to be mindful of these threats. And I think you mentioned that, when the Pahalgam terror attack happened, the Taliban did condemn the attack, and they did call for regional peace and stability. And while I do agree with Ambassador Heydari that the Taliban also had their own reasons as to why they would do that. Obviously, they do want some sort of legitimacy from the international community, which is why they have been projecting themselves as a very responsible regional actor, and the fact that they have commonalities with all people, and they just want to engage pragmatically with the countries and ensure and give them assurances that Afghanistan won't be used as a safe haven for terrorism. And while in an ideal, I think in an ideal situation, it would have been better had it not come to that, in the sense that, for all the countries in the region, for India, had there been alternative ways in terms of ensuring that its security is protected, that would have been a very good option. But in the absence of that, I think in the absence of there being any other means for now to ensure that India's security is not threatened, it has no choice but to talk to the Taliban, because if it doesn't, then it also sees that, as much as there are other countries which are engaging with the group, there are other countries who are looking out to protect their own self-interest. And I think from that perspective, India can't choose to look beyond that. And I do understand that there has to be, it has to exercise a lot of caution in terms of how it wants to take the relationship forward. And I think it was also mentioned in the panel how it's very difficult to foresee a long-term approach with regards to the Taliban, or even a medium-term approach, because everybody is going on a case-by-case basis. Everybody is slowly developing their policy. So that is the case with India as well. I think any policy that it wants to pursue with the Taliban, it has to be kind of, it has to be taken, like it has to be assessed every time something happens, because the Taliban is also the situation inside Afghanistan is also not stable. The Taliban is also still transitioning, they were an insurgent group, they were a terrorist group, and they're now kind of, I don't know, implementing some sort of governance within Afghanistan. So they are also in a transition period. So I think because of the unpredictability of the whole situation, India has to continuously reassess its policy, but obviously because of the security threat, it can't choose to look away from the Taliban.
Well, I disagree. I mean, they're not in transition. They're actively, as we speak, sheltering over 20 terrorist groups, networks with regional and transnational roots and objectives and goals. So they're, again, a non-state actor, a terrorist extremist, sanctioned. India is quite aware of who they are. They've been hit, by the Taliban, etc. So let's not here now sit on behalf of ORF and somehow justify who the Taliban are and not. It's very unfortunate to hear these statements coming from Delhi.
No, so I completely, if I may add a small point, I think in my previous intervention as well, I clearly stated that India has to be cautious of the fact that the Taliban are favoring some of the terror groups, like the fact that the Al Qaeda could proliferate in
Well,
Afghanistan.
we just say it's very simple. India is just, pursuing one track, it's security track, and that's a zero-sum track. All we, the Afghan people, are demanding, right, versus this 100,000 Taliban versus 40 million Afghans. We are asking India to pursue a two-track, a two-pronged strategy. One, security, another, values. And those values are democracy, pluralism, and benefiting India today on the medium term and to long term, and to learn lessons from Pakistan, because Pakistan has been doing exactly what India is now doing against Pakistan and Afghanistan through the Taliban, as Dr. Sharifi pointed out. So India should be different from Pakistan, right? So that the Afghan people look at you differently from Pakistan, not the Indian people, but the Indian government under Prime Minister Modi. So the policy pursued so far is very destructive, foremost to India on the long run. We want a policy that is constructive, foremost helping India and the Afghan people. That 40 million people versus 100,000 more or less terrorists and extremists indoctrinated in madrasas in Pakistan who consider Indians infidels, right? That's why most Hindu and Sikh Afghans left Afghanistan. They're all in Delhi. It broke my heart each time they would come to the embassy and sit and even cry, sob over their connections and ties and roots in Afghanistan. They were not happy to be in Delhi. They were not happy to be in India. But look, the last of them have left Afghanistan over the past 4 years. If they were safe, okay, Afghan Hindus and Afghan Sikhs under the Taliban, they wouldn't leave Afghanistan. They wouldn't go to India because their homeland is Afghanistan, it's not India. So India should keep that in mind. The Indian people, having had these civilizational ties that go into, over millennia, they understand that. Those who are knowledgeable about Afghanistan and about those, deep civilizational ties. But governments, unfortunately, get transactional, but the Modi government is too transactional, completely abandoned the people of Afghanistan. Look, thousands of Afghan students midway through their education have been stranded in India or kicked out of India. Why? Do they have any ties to the Taliban?
I think I would like to factually
To
correct you here.
terrorists that have been heading India, coming from Pakistan? Look, India has been punishing the Afghan people 40 million and completely discontinuing to speak for the values that we share and to also uphold its commitments under different agreements that India signed with Afghanistan, including under SPA, and again, of course, the values and the blood and treasure that Afghans have spent.
Okay, I'm afraid I'm going to have to pass on the discussion to Dr. Sharifi now, but I do want to factually correct you here, Ambassador. India's approach is not singular here. It's not unilateral. We were one of the first nations to rush aid when the earthquake took place on 31st August. We, in fact, led the way.
And that was not enough. It was just a few tracks of, I'm sorry to say this, India could have done a lot more. You didn't send any search and rescue teams. We needed from the neighbors, not a few tracks of wheat flour. I've worked with the United Nations and I know I work with the World Food Program and I know what that means. And I've distributed those, 5 kgs of wheat flour and 1 kg of sugar and 1 or 2 kgs of edible oil. That doesn't save any lives. What we expected, and we issued from Displace International, calling specifically on the member states of SCO, foremost, of course, India, to send search and rescue teams to help save surviving lives who ultimately, unfortunately, passed away because no search and rescue teams were sent from the neighborhood. We expected that from India, from Pakistan, of course, in terms of disaster, humanity matters above all else, from Iran, from the rest. And no one showed up, or China, or Russia. Yeah, lately, only Tajikistan stands out, to their credit. And we issued another statement to appreciate, many trucks. You can see 3,000 metric tons of a variety of different foods. Look at the size of, Tajikistan and Central Asia and the size of India. $1 trillion, worth of your GDP versus a country which, India can buy easily, GDP-wise speaking. And yet, Tajikistan provided more, same kind of assistance, a bit late, but a lot more than India. Well, India as
I
ever,
believe
I know,
they
I know
were
India is India is one of the best disaster preparedness institutions, mechanisms, equipment, and personnel. And in India did not send one, not because of the Afghan people, but because of their new friends in the Taliban so-called de facto government.
So how did we send the aid then? Who did we send the aid?
Well, just you organize a few tracks, you put the Indian flags in front of them, much like Pakistanis did, and then the rest. And that probably did not even reach the beneficiaries because the Taliban are in charge.
Ambassador, we also sent flights.
Yeah. So I'm aware
I'm going
of
to
it.
have to ask you to look it up a little bit. But anyway, Dr.
Well,
Sharifi,
I have. I'm following these things every day. I'm now in the humanitarian sector, not so much in geopolitics. So India has failed the Afghan people. We should make that very clear.
absolutely. But I believe,
Yeah.
there are other perspectives to this. There are other sides to this.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'd love to ask Dr. Sharifi about uh, how would you compare the terrorism threat under the Taliban and in the Republican era, when the Republic government was there?
Well, first of all, I've been really enjoying this back and forth. So now to take the discussion back into the terrorism threat, I will have to give you a sort of a data research-based academic response as opposed to a more political response here, although the academic response may not be, if not politically not correct, but not maybe politically undesirable. And in that, I would like to talk very quickly about the presence of terrorist groups and then the threat perception of them as exists at the present moment. Now, if we talk about the presence of terrorist groups in Afghanistan, it's unfortunately goes back a long time. It goes back to the early 1980s, goes back to the war with the Soviets and the intervention by the West, particularly of the United States and Saudi Arabia, and bringing in all kinds of bad people in there and giving them a lot of money and all of that. We know that story. The point I wanted to make is that presence has continued since then. It never was extinguished. So even during the 20 years of the Afghan Republic and the presence of at one point over 100,000 NATO troops in the country, that presence unfortunately continued. We could not extinguish it. We could not completely get rid of that. And so that presence seems to still be the case, seems to be there. Not a lot of changes to it. Now, when it comes to the assessment of threats, now countries usually do threat assessment based on two main principles. I mean, you look at the intentions and then you look at the capabilities of a terrorist group. And the ideal counterterrorism measure by any country or any organization would be to address both the intentions and the capabilities of a terrorist groups in order to extinguish the threat that they are posing. If we look at that, many of the terrorist groups that have existed for many years don't really seem to be a lot of capabilities. Don't seem to have a lot of capabilities at present. Like we've always talked about the 2022 terrorist groups. I've written about that. I've done all kinds of, I think I may have been one of the first people when I was at the NSC to start with this theory of, 20 terrorist groups and et cetera, et cetera. Um, if you look at the capabilities of all of these groups, only really two stand out with some capabilities. We have the TTP, we talked about the TTP, Taliban in Pakistan, and then we have ISKP of the groups that do exist in Afghanistan. Now, the TTP is strong, it seems to be even growing stronger, but it is really focused on Pakistan, and in Pakistan, primarily focused on Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And if you look at their stated objectives, their objectives is very localized. It's specifically in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. They're not even claiming farther, geographically speaking, even inside Pakistan, or let alone other countries or the region or beyond. The TTP has not had any claims to that. Then we get to ISKP, or the Islamic State Khorasan province, which has a stated objective of having global objectives, global target scenarios. And we have seen they've attacked Iran, they've attacked Russia, they have attempted to attack many places in Europe over the past few years. And at least I am aware of at least 12 cases where ISKP cells were apprehended and dismantled in European cities over the past few years. So ISKP does have that global agenda. But ISKP happens to be very much opposed to the Taliban. The Taliban have hit back at ISKP very, very strongly. In fact, the operations they've conducted against ISKP over the past 4 years have reduced ISKP's presence to only cell-based underground presence in Afghanistan. ISKP does not hold any territory right now. I'm not here. Let me be clear. I'm just saying this out of the pure research that I continue to do on that. ISKP used to have permanent presence going back to the early 2015, I would say, at least in eastern Afghanistan. But that presence doesn't exist anymore. They are now there, but cell-based, underground, smaller presence. Much of the existence and apparatus of ISKP seems to be actually in Pakistan right now, in Balochistan. Even Sanaullah Ghafari or Shahab al-Mahajir, who's the stated leader of ISKP, is believed to live in Pakistan. So these are the two groups that have both the intention, but localized. ISKP's intentions would be global and some capabilities. So, can you hear me? Hello?
You are definitely breaking there. Yeah, you're back.
Yes.
We lost you very
am I?
briefly for a couple of seconds. Yeah. Oops.
There's something going on. I don't know if you can hear me right now. No?
You're back on, yes. I think it's internet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I was saying was that the TTP and ISKP do have capabilities. The rest of the groups, including Al-Qaeda and including the ETIM, the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, which are the Chinese Uyghurs, the IMU, the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, or Jamaat Ansarullah of Tajikistan, or others, don't seem to have a lot of capabilities right now. And this is something I'm telling based on the assessments that is done by the Americans, assessments that is done by the Europeans, and assessments that is done by some of the countries in the region. And it's kind of seemed to be backed by a track record over the past many years. At least I have not heard of any tangible attack by the IMU or by the ETIM or by Jamaat Ansarullah or even by Al-Qaeda. And as such, the perception at least seems to be in the West, the threat perception in the West and in the region is that the actual threat of terrorism, at least in the short term, right now seems to be a lot lower than it used to be. As a result, countries are not really concerned. The Chinese are not concerned about ETIM anymore. Even though they're in bed with the Taliban, they're not concerned. In fact, they came to us when I was in the government and they requested that we build what we came to call a mountain brigade. I was in charge of the project. We were trying to build, paid by the Chinese, build a mountain brigade specifically in Badakhshan to kill ETIM. at the end, it didn't materialize because the Chinese were not willing to pay for it. But that concern doesn't seem to be there. IMU, the Uzbeks don't have a concerns about the IMU. The Uzbekistan have very close relations with the Taliban. Even the Tajiks don't really seem to be concerned. About Jamaat Ansarullah. So that is the current threat perception in the region and in the West. And the Americans really are not concerned about that. The Americans, the only threat of terrorism they're concerned with is what they claim, actually, in the talks that I have with them, is ISKP. And then they claim that the Taliban are very good at ISKP and they cooperate with them, they do joint things. And so that is there. However, to say that suffice, it seems to be, in my view, as an analyst, as a terrorism analyst, it seems to be a very myopic way of looking at the threat of terrorism. Unfortunately, the world had more or less the same perception before 9/11. And then we saw what happened. So the threat of terrorism, while in the short term may not be perceived as big across the world, but also specifically on Afghanistan by the countries in the region, in the long term, it could come back and it could really destabilize, it could really be a problem for the region and potentially even beyond.
Right. I think we've gone on for too long about the regional implications, the historical and the strategic context of, dealing with something like the Taliban. It's almost imperative on all of us to kind of acknowledge the fallout of this on Afghan women, nearly, half the population of Afghanistan. What happens to them? The devastating impact of engaging with someone like the Taliban, what it does, how it diminishes, their struggles. And I think this is the only place on the planet where girls and women can't go to schools and colleges. Women can't work. There's the absolute requirement of having a male chaperone. I mean, initially, countries like India, even Europe, in the West, everyone was hoping that this would be a moderate rule because that's what everyone from the top rungs of the Taliban was promising. But I think Taliban also tested the waters and they saw, okay, what if we roll out one edict and then see how the world reacts? And because the world failed to react and stop this in its tracks, we have now reached effectively a situation where women really can't step out, study, go to college, pursue any job. In a lot of conservative areas, some of the parts of the country, women can't even stand near a window. So I don't think anyone in the room believes that we should be doing this at the cost of Afghan women. I guess we have an agreement of that from all of the speakers here. Yeah. So what really happens then? Does any country think about Afghan women when they're dealing with the Taliban?
May I continue since I was just talking for just quickly? Unfortunately, not. Unfortunately, the Americans don't seem to care about Afghan women. To be very honest, I don't think the Europeans care about them. I don't think India cares or Pakistan cares or anybody else, really. I mean, everybody has really literally forgotten about that. But it's not only an issue of Afghan women. It's also an issue of Afghan men. Right now, the way the situation is, the country is completely shut down. The economy has shrunken very, very badly. Diplomatic isolation has devastated every single aspect of the country. The fact that there are no freedoms, of course, there are extreme lack of freedom for women, but there's also a lot of lack of freedom for men. So the point I wanted to make was that when we talk about Afghanistan and the future and the woman, I don't think it's only just an issue of a woman, and I don't think the problems would be resolved only by allowing women to go to school or go to work. Even if the Taliban right now allowed women to go to work, there is not a lot of employment opportunities. There literally isn't. So that's really not the solution. The only solution is a broader perspective. A country cannot be put on the limbo, I mean, forever. And Afghanistan has been on the limbo for the past 4 years. Now, the only solution is really to the benefit of the region and also to the benefit of the country and Afghans is the establishment of a rule-based government. a broad-based government, a government that does have the Taliban, that does include the Taliban. We cannot negate them. We tried to negate them for 20 years, and look what happened. We just could not do that. But not a government that is purely Taliban-led and Taliban-run. I mean, a government that they are part of it, that others are part of it, that is based on a constitution that really observes and guarantees the basic rights of all citizens, men and women, and that is out of this diplomatic, nightmare and diplomatic isolation that is there. And I think, to be very honest, and I'm going to stop here now, I don't think the West, everybody is looking back at the United States. Also, when is the US going to interfere and do that? I don't think the US, at least in the near term, next 3 years of the current US administration, I don't see them doing literally anything to that front. So it really comes back to the region. And I think if the region and India being a major player in the region, if they could spear a diplomatic effort, rally around the regional powers around it, around a common objective, an objective that benefits them all and benefits the Afghan people, I think that might get somewhere. But if you all wait there and sit there and wait for America to do something, unfortunately, I don't see America doing anything for men or women of Afghanistan.
That is so crystal clear, and I'm so glad that you've put it so briefly yet so powerfully. But Shivam, before we wrap this up on Afghan women's topic, because we're the only women on this panel, would you want to take up on, what are the ethical dilemmas of prioritizing geopolitical and economic interests over the human rights obligations that India has?
I mean, definitely, I think being the only two women on this panel, I think it is our responsibility as well to highlight that. The fact that I could sit here and talk at my own free will, while a lot of women in Afghanistan don't really have that option, does speak volume about the kind of situation that they are in. And I do agree with Dr. Sharifi when he said that, yeah, the world has forgotten about Afghan women. Like throughout this panel, we did talk about the fact how, India is engaging with them, how other countries are engaging with them for their own strategic considerations. And while we do acknowledge that every nation has the right to protect its own national interests, has the right to ensure that its people are protected, the the fallout of that has come on a very high on the people of Afghanistan, and particularly the women. So I think anybody looking at Afghanistan or anybody just observing what is happening in Afghanistan has to acknowledge that fact. So irrespective of us agreeing that why India acts the way it acts and why it has to protect its interests in Afghanistan, we also have to acknowledge the fact that there is a significant population of a significant percentage of population who is bearing the cost of that engagement. I think once we do acknowledge that, I think we can move ahead with maybe ensuring how to, from our side, what we can do best to kind of ensure that they are being protected. So I think from India's perspective, obviously, something that we covered throughout, that the expectation is very high, and India has, because historically it has done so much. Historically, it has supported Afghan people in their capacity building or in other aspects. So obviously, there is more expectation from India. And I think while there is a lot that India can still do in terms of focusing on the Afghan people, it is making some progress. So I won't completely ignore the fact. So like we did recently in 2023 resume some of the scholarships that we were giving to Afghan students for undergraduate and postgraduate courses, albeit for online courses. So I will acknowledge the fact that a lot of it is not what we would expect, in the sense like there is the expectation on the Afghan side that India should do more is valid to some extent, and I'm not negating it at all. But I do believe that there is some recognition in the Indian side as well now that they can't really, any long-term sustainable approach towards Afghanistan can't just rely on the fact that we are talking to the Taliban. You have to be cognizant of the fact that it is India's relationship with Afghanistan was based on its did have people-to-people ties as an important element. So I think in that respect, while there have been some small steps like this the resumption of some scholarships, or the fact that we have also, India has been working with some of the international aid agencies there in order to ensure, like I remember reading something about how India is have supporting the drug rehabilitation programs through UNODC, and how they are particularly targeting women through that. So I think a lot of that selective push in terms of assuring that while obviously we have seen that the pressure is not actually working on the Taliban, that we would have, they are not bulking on their policies. But I think what countries can do is, through the resources that they have, through the options that they have, even if it seems very minimal at the moment, even if it does not suffice for the kind of suffering that the people, women of Afghanistan are facing, I think it still should be seen as like it's still a lot better than actually not doing anything. So I think, yeah, I see it that way. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much for actually, you know, tying it together. And I've been also very desperate to speak to Amit now, and I have to do this. But also, before I go to Amit, we're going to be wrapping this up in 10 minutes, and I'm going to be asking you the future scenarios and regional stability because we're short on time. So, Ambassador Hedri, Shivam, and Dr. Sharifi, if you could like get like 2 points to make on how to deal with, this thing that we have, India and Taliban, and how it goes. And I'm aware we've already, sort of spoken about the future. But what would be your policy recommendations to New Delhi on how it should be cautiously, pragmatically, but also dealing with the Taliban? But yes, Amit, back to you on this. I know you've been, I wanted to ask you about the China's impact on the region. That's one. And also, what are the perils of engaging at the cost of Afghan women? With such a partner, with a partner that if we turn into a foe, I don't think any other country, including Afghanistan, would be preventing us from losing our innocent civilians in terrorist attacks.
Okay. First thing is that I do agree with Dr. Sharifi and even Shivam that no country has come forward for the women and girls. And in fact, even neither the UN, even the UN ended up inviting the Taliban for a lot of meetings in Doha and stuff. But I was like couple of months back, I was in Europe and somebody informed me that, that the Taliban shuras are actually stopped consulting the Pakistani ulemas and the religious leaders with regard to the women and the girls' education. And instead, they have approached the Indian government to connect them to the Deobandi schools based in India in regard to the women and girls education. So I do believe there might be some hope when the India comes into the picture in regard to the women's and girls education. I think we have a long history of saying that women empowerment has been in our genes for the ages now. So I don't see that uh, if the India comes into the picture and Taliban shuras start negotiating with the Deobandi school that we have in India with regard to the women and girls, I think there is a possibility of opening this up. And I don't have any resources to back this up, but I do believe that this rumor could be more on a positive side. Now I'll come back to the question of how the Chinese investments and Chinese presence in Afghanistan is like. So basically, see, there is a massive difference in how Chinese have been engaging with the Taliban. I think the Chinese have been in constant touch with the Taliban since their inception in 90s, and precisely during the global war on terrorism, precisely after 2014, they started talking about the peace meetings that the Afghan government and the stakeholder, that is the Taliban. In fact, in one of their official document, they called Taliban as an important and potent military and political force in Afghanistan, and they are rightful stakeholders. So the Chinese already made it clear that they see Taliban as part of the Afghan government without being there. So the Chinese have been there. Chinese have been making double standard call, or they might call it something else. I don't know. But in my perspective, I see they have been playing a double standard game with regard to the Afghanistan. On one side, they have been supporting the Taliban with all sort of ammunition and weapons and finances that they might be needing. And secondly, they have been engaging officially on the platform, on the official diplomatic platforms, and asking the Republican government to come to a conclusion. So that was happening way back in 2015, 16, and onwards. I think this is where India lagged behind. India was pretty much delayed in its diplomatic approach with the Taliban. And therefore, this is one reason I see that led to some kind of unsettlement in the diplomatic circle, that whether we should keep our embassy or we should withdraw, because the situation was very much unclear to it. However, when you compare this with the Chinese, it wasn't the case, neither with the Russians, because they have been there for, like, I think even 2014 and 15, India never engaged with the Taliban as a stakeholder or anything. India began something that started surfacing way late in 2019. So I think somewhere India lagged diplomatically. Second thing is, right now Chinese are making heavy inroad into the security architecture with the Taliban. They have installed, I don't know how many cameras, but these cameras are pumped up by Huawei, which is very much known to keep capture and profile the human faces, and even tell you about the ethnics of these things. And of course, the Chinese are doing precisely for their own interest vis-a-vis the East Turkestan. And it is true that that the the two major threat for the Chinese right now would be the ISKP and the East Turkestan. And this East Turkestan is further divided into two parts. The one that is housed by the Taliban, and the second that is housed by the ISKP. And there is also seen that the Turkestan, the Uyghurs militant, if they are, they swing between the groups. They are, recently there were news that the ISKP offered them better finances and better life, and there was a movement observed that a lot of Uyghur militants shifted the Taliban camps to the ISKP camp. So Chinese are heavily present there. They are keeping a close eye on the security infrastructure of the Taliban, and they are also monitoring it through digital technology, and they are even helping Taliban develop a digital security infrastructure. However, India's approach to the security infrastructure vis-a-vis Afghanistan is not something that I can speak of, because I don't really know what's happening on the ground. But I can definitely say that the Taliban, for the time being, and it is right that they are definitely seeking legitimacy, and whatever it takes for them, even if that takes to condemn Pakistan, the Taliban are ready to do it. So they are all out to stabilize their government with the support of the China or whosoever they wish to. And I don't really I'm not really in a position to speak about how India is engaging with the Taliban in terms of the security, but in terms of the security with the Chinese, they have made heavy inroads, and they are in a better position to maneuver and decide who would further be called as a terrorist groups and not be called as a terrorist
Okay.
group.
So as a yes or no, do you think that forces India's hand to kind of step up its engagement?
Sorry, I didn't get you. Can you repeat
I'm
that?
saying, do you think that forces India's hand at engaging with the Taliban, whatever China is doing?
Yeah, of course, of course. If see, the very idea of how Taliban is sustaining in Afghanistan is precisely because of the politics. I remember talking to the former vice president of Afghanistan, Amrullah Saleh. So we had an exchange of mails, and where he called the Taliban as just a geopolitical tool. So of course it is their presence in Afghanistan in itself is a tool that you can use to fulfill your immediate interest. Chinese are doing theirs, Americans are doing theirs, and we Indians are of course doing our best, be it with our presence inside the Afghanistan or outside in the Qatar or Doha. It does not matter. Every country is trying to reap the benefit, the immediate interest. Nobody knows whether the Taliban are going to sustain tomorrow or not. But why to sacrifice your today for tomorrow? So let's fulfill what is needed at the moment. So India is doing its best to keep its immediate interest protected, and so is the case with the Chinese. Chinese are equally dealing with the same intention. I would like to inform you that, some of the contracts with the Chinese have stopped, like the extraction of Amu Darya, even the copper mines, whatever the reason may be. But even they are not settling so well because of some memorandum of understanding. So yes, it is the geopolitics that is sustaining Taliban in Afghanistan. And how long will this go will depend on how the great power rivalry goes on, especially the Chinese and the US. The Chinese are the best alternative financial market or the financial supporter for the Taliban, if not the US. Right now, it is the Chinese who is promising a lot of investments in the country, as well
Kind of
as
stop.
I just want to
Just
close
down to
by
2 minutes.
saying, yeah, I
Sorry,
just
I'm
want to
really
say that, yeah, perfect. I just want to say even the regional actors like Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Iran, and including Russia, are also doing it under the influence of the deep pockets of the Chinese. Even the Gulf countries are coming to Taliban's rescue. Would you believe none of the Gulf countries ever criticized the Taliban? Why? Because they are under the deeper influence of Chinese deep pockets, which is keeping their mouth shut and for their own maybe domestic interest. So I
all
believe
right.
it is
Okay.
the geopolitics.
Yeah. Uh, that's a very good geopolitical implication that you pointed out. I think we're down to exactly 1 minute now. So, I'll have to really rush through the policy recommendations that I wanted to ask all of you here. Whoever wants to go first can go. I believe, yeah, Ambassador Hidri should go. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'd like to just summarize more or less what all of us have been discussing, that the Taliban are solely responsible for at least five intertwined crises. Political, we discussed a lack of a legitimate internationally recognized government. Economic, total collapse, we know over 20 plus million Afghans need humanitarian aid. Um, And humanitarian, as I just added, itself is now getting more and more complex given climate change and as well as these earthquakes. Gender apartheid is another crisis that we just discussed, and is direct all of these intertwined crises under the Taliban, implications for regional stability and global peace and international security. Gender apartheid, as much as we underestimate, directly threaten security in the region of India foremost. Why? Because women imprisoned in their homes end up being depressed, sending their kids to madrasas, mushrooming now over 10,000, where these kids get indoctrinated. Once indoctrinated and radicalized, of course, they're trained as suicide terrorists sent on missions at home and in the region foremost and across the world. So that's why gender apartheid in Afghanistan is as much a humanitarian human rights crisis, but it's also a security crisis that the region and others beyond will have to pay a price if they do not address it. So that's why the region, foremost, we agreed, shouldn't be transactional, shouldn't contain the problems, as just Hamid pointed out, that every country in the region somehow say, we don't care about what's happening in Afghanistan. The Taliban geopolitical tool, we use them if we want to, or we just contain the problems under the Taliban in Afghanistan, seal off our borders, prevent any spillover effects into our homeland. But that's not, what we've seen over the past 4 decades. At least in the 1990s, we saw the spillover effects. We see it today in the form of refugees going to Iran, Pakistan, a drain on their economy. Then, of course, in the 1990s, what we saw Al Qaeda heading 9/11. We just recently commemorated that. So what's happening in Afghanistan is very much the business of the region and beyond the region, but foremost the region. And the region as a platform now, SCO, SARC, BRICS, REC, name it. Here, there's an opportunity for India. India can just transactional deal with the Taliban and wait for the threats to head it down the road, or India can take advantage of this as an opportunity to, intertwine problems affecting the region and take a position and play a leading role in these platforms, which I mentioned, advocating for institutionalization of our shared values and shared interests, as described in the Afghan India Strategic Partnership Agreement. It's a perfect, comprehensive document that deals with everything on the short run, medium term, and long term. India can revitalize that and work on it, while, of course, transactional dealing with the Taliban. So, no
Correct.
recognition for the Taliban. Humanitarian aid should continue on the part of India. And I ask India to couple aid, it's providing aid, but couple it with advocacy. And I've been saying that throughout my talk. Third, should provide a safe haven, like I said, for the Afghan talent. Continue providing visas, allowing Afghan students to continue, their education, getting their degrees, supporting for the Afghan civil society, especially those organizations led by women for the Afghan women and the diaspora, and as well as providing scholarships, fellowships, and opportunities to assemble through forums, conferences, online, offline, in Delhi. And then last, as I said again, and I repeat it again and again, and a regional and global diplomacy. I think India, by virtue of being the neighbor, civilizational ties, the blood and treasure Afghans spent for India, and in so many ways, not just, for the Afghan people, but for itself, to be a voice in all of those platforms for a sustainable solution to the problem of Afghanistan under the Taliban, the Taliban being the problem, the Taliban being the father, mother of the problem, with their state sponsor sitting next door, only focusing on TTP, but continuing to support the Taliban. We shouldn't forget that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you so much. I would love to jot them down and probably, use them in a story also, because these are quite valid arguments. And, I do want to check with India why has this not been, acted on? It would be quite interesting to hear from them. Shivam, can I take you next, please, for your recommendations, please?
Yes, I'll be very brief. So yeah, in terms of how how India can deal with the situation in the future, I think India should keep its rather increase its engagement with the Afghan people, which is something that we all came at a consensus to. So I think there is a lot that could be done, and there is a lot that should be done. But either it is through aid agencies, either it is through regional groupings that India is a part of. But I think there is still scope for some more things to be done on that front. And I think for a long-term stable, a long-term solution, it is an important consideration. Secondly, I think in terms of India charting its own policy towards Afghanistan, I think it should be mindful of, it should constantly recalibrate its policy as the situation develops in Afghanistan. So there is still, the dynamics in the country do change very quickly, and the Taliban domestically also, there's a lot of pressure in terms of, Ambassador Hedri also mentioned the economic situation and all of that. So I think while these are not talked about that much, India should keep a constant check on what's happening internally in Afghanistan, and then kind of factor in terms of how it's engaging with the Taliban. And yeah, I think basically that's it.
Thank you so much. Dr. Sharifi, please.
Yes, very briefly too. I would like to be realistic here. Well, I don't think India will do any of the things that were proposed. I think India, very realistically speaking, is going to continue its transactional relations with the Taliban. I think, right now what is going on in Afghanistan and in the region, in fact, relevant to the issue in the broader world, is the game of stag hunt, basically. Everybody knows that if everyone got together, they could hunt the deer, but the stag, but everybody is actually going after the rabbit. Why? Because they're not sure if the other people would cooperate. And no country, unless it's one of the biggest powers in the world, i.e. the United States, would really spearhead an effort to normalize the situation and build a broad-based, law-based government there. I don't think any of the countries in the region will ever do that. I think this will continue. So I don't want to really propose anything beyond this. If India were to initiate, take the leadership of an initiative in the region, at least to rally around both countries in the world and then advocate for support beyond the region, it could have, possibly a positive effect on Afghanistan and also in its own diplomatic clout in the region. But given how things are in the region, given how things are in Afghanistan, the dynamics between India and China, dynamics between India and in the United States, I am really not optimistic that India would do any of that. So, unfortunately, I do not have a very positive view of things that are to unfold in the near future. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Doctor. Okay, Amit, do you want to make your points, please?
I think I would agree with Dr. Sharifi. India would not rush to do anything right now and continue to follow its case by case basis approach to every issue and maintain cautious distance from Taliban and continue to engage with Taliban on some third land, not in India or not in Afghanistan for that matter, and would wait how the West responds to the Taliban's behavior and would continue to watch it. However, I think apart from the political dimension of the Taliban and India's relation, I think India should open up its economic India should find ways to, engage with Taliban economically or find something recently India conducted Uzbekistan and Afghanistan and Iran. They brought this north-south corridor access and using Chabar port. So I think India should not like most of the Afghan complaints abandon them, but India should continue to engage economically with the Afghanistan, provide anytime needed. But I think India has been doing great in terms of humanitarian support. So I think India should continue to do that, and India should not get stuck by the diplomatic hiccups that is there and that will prolong because nobody knows when it is going to end. But that should not stop India from, you know, how India can benefit the region economically, maybe give push to North-South corridor, which I think is working working well because I think it is progressive and it is progressing. And India should also, open the door for the Afghans traders to not solely rely on the Pakistani seaports, but also on the Iranian side. India should work more towards helping Afghanistan stabilize economically, regardless of whether that will give legitimacy or not legitimacy. That is not my concern. My concern is to provide the economic benefit, not get restrained by political problems that there is a political problem and therefore rest of the problems are because of the political problem. I think countries have devised measures and ways and mechanism to even provide economic benefit despite the political problem. So I think India should give a deeper thought over all of this. That is all from my side. However, India should also continue to keep a tab on Taliban in terms of security checks because I think uh, uh, if India loses Taliban, hypothetically, and Taliban and Pakistan could be a deadly cocktail for India, and that is one serious reason I believe that engaging with Taliban is important for India. So I think these are the things that India should watch out for. Thank you so much.
All right. I think that's the length and breadth of everything that we can speak about the India and Taliban relationship. Everyone's been like extremely kind and gracious, and I'm really in the awe of Ambassador because he's gone above and beyond, share his thoughts with us. Uh, you know, you've actually made some very reasonable arguments, and I feel you were the accurate representation of Afghan people on this
Well, for me,
platform.
the Afghan people come first. No personal interest, no institutional, no regional. The Afghan people have suffered for 5 decades, and I want to mention that again and again and again to every country in the region. And I think if everyone this is live watching, the Afghan people have suffered for too long, and it's because of the region. Our challenges, our problems are regionally rooted. The solutions are also in the region, provided that the region work on a win-win basis because zero sum has cost all of them and will continue costing all of them. And I think for India, besides its security track, it needs to add the people's track. That's our basic expectation, and I think that's what the Indian people would also agree in a democracy, that why India should forget and shelve all those ties, all those investments, all those agreements, and the strategic partnership agreement for which we paid a heavy cost, and just embrace 100,000 sanctioned terrorist extremists who consider Indians infidels and would target India and have targeted India in the past and are up for grabs and up for rent against India any minute, as we discussed, transactionally speaking, versus 40 million Afghans who have always embraced India and have always befriended the people of India. So India needs to really rethink its foreign policy. Transactionally, as it was pointed out, yes, I agree with Dr. Sharifi and others. That's the world that we are in. But also there are values, and those values are again should be seen as interests, and there are interests: human rights, women's rights, ending gender apartheid in Afghanistan, right? Itself, as I pointed out, and I securitize that. That's why when I talk to the military people here in Pentagon, other places, I securitize things. So they really see these values through a security perspective, through a terrorism perspective, through an extremism perspective. So values are interests, that values are national security interests, which this administration in the US is disregarding its own costs, pursuing an isolationist foreign policy. And we shouldn't go there. But again, speaking in the region, I think India has many strategic opportunities to lead on Afghanistan to its own advantage, foremost strategically speaking, and then, of course, Afghanistan and the region itself. Remember that India is a rising power, not in other continents. India is an Asian continental power. And so, where it needs security to continue rising. And that's why these recent exchanges between India and China now were optimistic and probably a reason for hope, as much as we're talking about these transactional issues. But continentally speaking, I think for these powers to rise, they need a stability and their own shared neighborhood. Afghanistan is in the backyard of China and is in the backyard of India. It's in the backyard of course, Pakistan and Central Asia. They cannot afford not to collaborate and cooperate on Afghanistan. They must cooperate. They must not confront, denying external players an opportunity to have them confront as opposed to cooperate and collaborate. I think that's in the shared interests of all of those countries in our neighborhood, the 6 countries that we are neighbor, but also in the interests of Europe, because given the geographic proximity, and as well as the United States as well at the end of the day. Thank you.
Right. Yes, values do underline wherever we go. And, I think even in decades later, I hope these values are the ones that Afghans remember Indians by, and Indians can continue living with a lot of love for Afghans in our hearts. So, and we continue to celebrate Nowruz festival with them. So, with that, I think I'll like to conclude the seminar today. I'm really happy that all of us could get together, and I'm so glad that it was a very robust discussion. And I guess that's what happens when you get exceptional people like Dr. Sharifi, Shivam, who's really been a beacon of speaking on like not just security but also for women and all of the other topics, be it defense, economic part of it. And Amit, you've been joining us, and I can understand it's really late for all of us here in India, but this is also the kind of love that we have for Afghanistan. With that, I'd like to conclude and really thank you so much, for taking part in this.